Please be seated. I want to welcome everybody to the 2022 Senior Thesis Week, and welcome specifically to Harper Hightower's oral. I'm Mr. Perea, and Harper was my senior assistant this year, helped out in pre-cal and geometry, and she did an awesome job, as you might imagine. So joining me on the panel today are Mrs. Snell and Mr. Custer, and we're honored to be up here with her. This is going to be a great week. Thank you all for coming, getting up early. There's 33 orals this week, and they're all going to be rich and unique, so come as much as you can. These will all be streamed online, so thank you all for, or welcome those of you who are joining us from afar. There's a lot that gets squeezed into an hour. Harper will present her speech. We'll have a conversation. She'll ask us a couple questions. There's going to be more than we can cover in an hour. So I hope that this is the beginning of a longer conversation that you could have with Harper or with your friends and family. This is actually a great one to start with because she's talking about not overdoing things. So don't come to all 33. Without further ado, I'll open us in prayer and then hand things off to Harper. Father God, thank you so much for your goodness and for all of these seniors and their years of work that are coming to fruition in this moment, God, as they present what you've placed on their hearts. I pray for Harper. I pray for your spirit to be in this room with us, and God, give us ears to hear what you have to say. We love you. In Christ's name, amen.
We all know that there are 4 different seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. But have you ever considered how each season is designed with a different purpose? Spring, summer, and fall are all productive seasons. Spring's for planting, summer's for growth, and fall's for harvesting. But what is winter designed for? This season is unique. There's nothing to be done but to let the ground rest. This might seem unnecessary or even peculiar to many. And it wasn't until I started to observe the seasons that I started to question, why would the ground of the earth need to rest? Why would production need to cease? Does a world feel overworked and the effects of exhaustion? What I've found is that God's creation has a built-in practice of resting. It's not by accident that winter's there. Another principle that resembles winter is a 7th day of creation. The Bible tells us that after creating everything in the world, God spent a day resting and soaking up the good work that he had done. But God did not add a 7th day of creation because he was exhausted. Rather, he added a 7th day of creation so that we can find our rest in him. The 7th day in practice is called the Sabbath, which comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat. The Sabbath was created for all of creation, for the plants, the ground, the animals, and the humans, you and me. God designed us to rest. But how often does a human experience reflect this principle that's written in our very being? How often do we take time out of our day or a week to not only rest, but to intentionally practice the Sabbath? For many here, a hurried lifestyle is an everyday reality, and the idea of taking time off to Sabbath sounds irresponsible. But I would argue that Satan's grasp on the world has caused us to strive for a hurried, busy, and success-driven life, a life that directly opposes the restful and steady pace that God calls us to walk through life with. This pace resembles that which Jesus walked through life with. With only 33 years on this earth, Jesus did and accomplished exactly what he needed to do. He never ran from town to town, he walked. He took breaks and was attentive to the people around him, to heal and to redeem and to revive. He often went off to be alone and pray. As believers, we're called to live like Jesus, by adopting and practicing his character. And though there are many, many attributes of Jesus that we can work to better resemble and live out, my hope is that through examining the values of resting, which Jesus so perfectly lived out, we can resist the temptation to overstrive and start to rest. Practicing the Sabbath is the essential element to a hurry-filled life. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, written by John Mark Comer, is a book full of defining the dangers of a fast-paced life and the blessings of a Sabbath. John Mark Comer is a pastor, a speaker based out of Oregon, and an author of a few best-selling books. Comer wrote, "But the Sabbath is more than just a day. It's a way of being in the world. It's a spirit of restfulness that comes from abiding, from living in the Father's loving presence all week long. The Sabbath is essentially willfully stopping and resisting the hurried life our human nature tells us we so desire. And practicing it once a week should help us maintain a Sabbath-like mindset throughout the mundane and busy life that we live. Well, what does the practice of Sabbath look like? To avoid a legalistic practice that becomes a burden, the Sabbath is customizable to the person and the season that they find themselves in. Although, it is important to note that the point of Sabbath resting isn't to indulge in mind-numbing activities. Rather, it's quite the opposite. The art of Sabbath is found in attentiveness, and this is found in having a Sabbath heart like Homer described. After all, if we indulge in a hurried lifestyle without maintaining a restful heart, we will fail to see the moments in which God shows up. In Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, the Bible presents us with a more detailed definition and charge of the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The Sabbath is referenced as the 4th command in the 10th commandments, but it's more significantly presented to us as a gift. It's not something we have to work for. Everyone gets to have a Sabbath. It comes down to whether people will actually use it. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man and not the man for the Sabbath. Mark 2:27. The Sabbath is just simply this, a day or evening or appointed time that is set apart to routinely rest, to do no work, to not prove yourself, but to rest. To effectively persuade you to practice a Sabbath, I want to set up the dangers of a life lived without the Sabbath, which is a fast-paced and hurried life. In the world today, people are admired for being driven and successful. This is not a bad thing inherently, but it turns into a bad thing when someone is labeled as lazy for only taking off a day to rest. There are many beneficial side effects to taking days off, but what happens when we never do? In obvious ways, a fast-paced lifestyle affects us in the physical aspect, with feelings of exhaustion and burnout. Not only that, but it also affects us mentally and spiritually as well. Mentally, a hurried lifestyle cultivates the vice of impatience. We currently live in what's called the information age, which means that with evolving technology, information has become increasingly easier and faster to attain. And not only is information extremely accessible, but things are always at the convenience of our fingertips. In Apologetics, we read, Socrates meets Jesus. This book tells us of a story of what it might be like if Socrates, the philosopher from ancient Athens, awoke in a college campus in the 1980s. As Socrates explores the new technologies and ways of life, he concludes that those around him worship the god of progress. Yet, what are we progressing towards? Progress has no defined end, and however much we may try to work towards it, we will never have a consistent goal. You cannot progress toward a finish line if it continues to move as you run. As sources like Google and Amazon continue to progress to help us attain things like information and material objects faster and easier, we will consistently be left impatient. We will never be given the opportunity to practice patience unless we stop worshiping the God of progress. And when we don't receive the things that we want in a quick time frame, we become frustrated. This same thinking is why a hurried lifestyle also affects us spiritually. What happens to us when we want God to do something in our life right away, and it ends up taking a long time to come about? We get frustrated at God and conclude that slower is less efficient and less desirable. Isn't it peculiar that we put everything on a timeline, even the things that God is working through and in our lives? All in all, living a hurried lifestyle gives us a notion that we are privileged enough to own our own time. Unfortunately, life is not always like Disney World. We cannot fast pass the experiences that give us character and endurance. We cannot fast pass God's plan for us. We've been conditioned to live this way, but I would not defend it as a naturally good way to live. There's something missing from the human experience, something so rich, so freeing, so fulfilling, we only need to pause. We know that resting and taking time off is a good thing, but if the absence of resting is continuing to work, then is work a bad thing? Throughout the Bible, we see how God designed work and the value of working diligently. Do these two principles contradict each other? I do not think so. When the Sabbath is not implemented in our life, good things like work can potentially turn into a terrible thing, even though it was a good thing created by God. God created both work and rest. One is not exclusive of the other. In Genesis, God gave the first man and woman a job, something to do and something to cultivate. This is not a bad thing. But there's something missing. We don't like to work. Whether we're working or not, we spend a significant amount of our time complaining about it, worrying about it, preparing for it, and recovering from it. Ask anybody about their work. It's not typically their favorite way to spend their time. Many people I have talked to do have a positive relationship with their work, but I can confidently say that their work cannot fulfill all of their needs. And it's undeniable that at the end of the day, everyone is ready to get off of work and go on vacation. I know these principles as truth because I read in the Bible. When sin entered the world, the exciting gift of work turned into a sort of punishment. Genesis 3:17 says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life." God has given us a beautiful, resourceful call to life, to work. But as humans, we've skewed with its image and its purpose. How do we see and experience work the way that God designed it? We're missing one simple key, something that God showed us in his process of creating everything. He rested. With work must come rest. And if we don't rest, we often find that God will make us rest in the physical aspect. Our finite bodies are unable to keep up with the demands of our aspirations. Have you ever come down with a cold from being physically exhausted? It happened to me a few times this year alone. Thankfully, God offers us a rest that fulfills all of our needs while also maintaining a job or an education. David knew a thing or two about it. In Psalm 23, he says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake." Now that we know what the absence of Sabbath leads to, what does the practice of Sabbath lead to? God works on the long arc. Throughout our life, and a little at a time, God is refining our character. Holiness does not happen overnight. Rather, it's a lifetime enterprise. If we do not willfully slow our pace and look around a little, we will miss this gift. As we live out life and continue to age, many things will stop growing. For example, our hair, our strength, and our height. But our call to grow and become more and more like Jesus will never expire. As Christians pursue this lifestyle, the tendency is to eventually get burnt out. And this will happen if you do not implement the Sabbath in your life. Things that take a long time take patience. And how will we be able to be fully patient with ourselves if we do not slow down and receive the patience that God has for us? If we're moving at such a fast pace, we do not have time to draw near and listen to God, which leads to getting burnt out in the pursuit of holiness. The temptation is to always do something and to never let God do something within us. A large way that God works in people is that we are the receivers of his goodness and forgiveness and freedom, not the actors. God is after our availability, not our ability. I had the opportunity to interview Mark Buchanan, who is a pastor and author of several books and a speaker based out of Canada. During our discussion over the relationship between practicing the Sabbath and becoming holy, he shared with me an analogy that character growth is like fruit and not vegetables. For vegetables to grow, it takes one season, but for fruit to grow, it takes many seasons. For example, for a carrot to grow, it takes about 3 months, but for an apple tree to grow, it takes 10 years. That's why love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control are all called the fruits of the Spirit and not the vegetables of the Spirit. Buchanan shared, at the core of that analogy is this life of holiness, and how it relates to the Sabbath is that it is unrushed. There needs to be a profound patience. God has the patience for it. Why don't we have a patience for ourselves or for others for it? Holiness is simply a lifetime enterprise, and practicing the Sabbath is the essential element to maintain a patience for growing fruit in our life. Personally, I struggle every day with the temptation to strive, which is the exact opposite lifestyle from what I've been telling y'all this whole time. I would label myself as a people pleaser, someone who wants to spend all their time doing the things that will make people proud of them and their work. And in my senior year, the struggle kicked into full gear. Suddenly, I was trying to get into colleges, trying to maintain my grades, planning school dances, being involved in assembly, being involved in church, trying to be an intentional RT leader and senior assistant, participating in school sports, continuing to dance in my studio, applying for scholarships, and desperately not wanting to miss out on anything. I was physically exhausted, I was mentally exhausted, and I was extremely spiritually exhausted. But all this striving was in vain. My favorite Bible verse tells me, "Unless the Lord builds a house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand and watch in vain. In vain you rise up early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." Psalm 127, verses 1 through 2. I'd lost sight of the promise in this verse. He will provide for me the rest that I need, and I'm not selfish or lazy for taking it. This has been an extremely valuable and life-giving lesson to learn. But I wish I'd learned it sooner in my high school career. I think many MCA students can relate to me in my struggle. The academic culture we have here has made it challenging to find ourselves in a position that is not burnt out. It's hard for us to appreciate the value of slowness when it is labeled as a blunder to our academic success. The numerous books and high passing grade are also overwhelming. So many students see it that way. And it's very easy to let our school accomplishments become the source of our validation, but it does not have to be. I believe what we're all missing is knowing the value of resting and learning about the practice of the Sabbath. The reality is, practicing the Sabbath is essentially about giving yourself grace. After all, nothing ever blooms all year long, and God does not expect us to either. This is not a reality I ever wanted to face, but learning to appreciate the winters and seasons of growing fruit in my life helped me to appreciate the gift of the Sabbath. God wants us to receive his rest, especially in the midst of a hurry-filled life, a life that many of us here live. Practicing the Sabbath is the essential element to receiving this rest. And through this rest, we become more holy and attentive to the work that he's doing in our lives. So, this is your invitation to slow down and receive the things that you strive to attain and to let the ground rest. Thank you.
Great job. Great job, Harper.
Thank you.
Well, that part's done. Are you more nervous for that or for this?
I think both equally.
Okay. You're going to do great. You have a lot of profound thoughts in what you shared. There's a lot of things that you couldn't include in your speech, based on our conversations from this year. So I'm excited for you to get to share some of that with us. You're definitely the expert at the table here. So we will start with kind of the softball question for the leadoff batter here. What are your plans for next year?
Next year, I plan to attend Texas A&M University and study in the School of Architecture.
Okay. And beyond that, do you know 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where you see yourself?
Not really,
that's
okay.
That's all right. So tell us a little bit about how you settled on this topic. I know there were several that you considered. Why'd you pick this one?
I kind of mentioned in my thesis that I struggle a lot with striving, and I did have a few different topics picked out. Initially, I wanted to do something very theological and make me sound very smart. But I realized that that's probably not what I needed in this season as being a senior. And learning about the Sabbath was essentially something I didn't know about at all. And it was something I was very skeptical about. But I recognized it as something that I needed in my life. I was kind of at the end of my rope. And so it was really helpful to me to learn about the Sabbath while also writing my thesis over it and reading books over it. It just coupled very well with what I was going through in this season. And so that's essentially why I originally wanted to do this topic.
Well, again, it's very relevant for your story and for all of us. So thank you for digging into this, and it's really convicting. So in your the book one of the books that you referenced, Socrates Meets Jesus, you talked about Socrates coming to visit a college campus in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, by show of hands, who has actual memories of the 1980s in the room? So not very, a fair number of us. So what I'm wondering, for those of us who don't remember the 1980s, I do, I'm old, but if Socrates came to a college campus in 2022, what would his observations be? Would they be different than what he saw in the 1980s?
I think that they would be the same. I think that he would still claim that we were worshiping the God of progress. I think maybe the examples might be a little bit different, and even maybe a little more intense, probably. He'd probably be a little more flabbergasted, because you can see in the book he's he thinks that everything's so crazy. So I definitely think that his mindset would be the same. So
do you think that the worship of the God of progress, I guess, if that's still the case, where did it start? Like, did it start in America? Did it start during the Industrial Revolution? What would you pinpoint as the beginning of kind of our desire to worship the God of progress?
I don't know if I can say a certain specific event because I'm like not a history buff.
Me neither.
But I think the earliest I can date it back to would probably be the fall.
Oh, that's pretty early.
Yeah. Just because like that is our human nature, and I think it's something that like I said, Satan has deceived us into thinking that like striving for a hurried and busy lifestyle is like it's a good thing and it's beneficial to us. And I think definitely back when the Bible was written, things were different because they didn't have the kind of technologies we have now. But I think that there was definitely a big shift when technology started to be invented, and it has affected the way that we are entertained. It's affected the way that we communicate. And I think with the more involvement in technology, we have like a shorter attention span, not lifespan, sorry. We have a shorter attention span. And so I think that definitely affects us wanting to worship the God of progress and not feeling satisfied with everything that we have.
That's good. And I think, if we really can trace it back to the fall, that's been the great lie of the tempter all this time to say, you can be like God. You can get the things that God is offering to you in your own way. You don't have to do it his way. And it's interesting that maybe the very best that we can do if we do it our own way is vegetables of the Spirit instead of fruits of the Spirit. So that's a very poignant metaphor. So thank you.
They're not as yummy.
They're not as yummy. Well, Mr. Custer might disagree with you, but he was probably the only person that I've ever met that might think that.
Carrots.
Great job, Harper.
Thank you.
Like Mr. Priya said, this topic was really convicting for me as well, just because I don't do this very well. And I started at an early age, probably my time at MCA. So I want to ask, do you think that MCA students also worship the God of progress?
I think in a sense it's very tempting to. I think everybody could, obviously. I don't want to throw like MCA or MCA students under the bus. The reason why I brought that up, because I think it's very relevant to us, and like as students at MCA, we have a higher standard that we are called to, which is a great thing. I think it's great to learn how to do that at such a young age. But like with everything, like with work must come rest. With hard education must come rest. There has to be a give and take. And so I think for MCA students, it's really easy to fall into that. But we are given really great resources to resist that. I think the tutors do a really great job of like helping us within that. And so I would say that yes, we do struggle a lot with that. And that's where kind of like the resistance to like having to read all these books and having to have a high passing grade is it's like, it just feels so hard and unattainable. But I think also some students can be perfectionists like myself. I do know a lot of students that are perfectionists, and having this culture where like you're kind of like awarded for being a perfectionist is like just makes it a little harder to resist that, if that makes sense.
How do you successfully resist that to have a balance of not getting burned out but still pursuing excellence?
I think practically you're going to have to be embarrassed a little bit, and you're going to have to fail a test. And I think that's a good thing because it shows you that like it's not the end of the world. And I think it's just found in learning how to manage your time, which like MCA does a really great job of. But I think it's practically is just like knowing that it's okay if you don't have A pluses in every class, and your tutors are still gonna be proud of you. Your parents are still gonna be proud of you, and yeah, it's really not the end of the world. So,
yeah, that's good. So, would you say that an essential element for practicing the Sabbath is good time management, or what would you say is an essential element in order to practice the Sabbath well?
I think it definitely would be good time management because practicing the Sabbath, it could be, if your schedule doesn't allow it, then that would be really hard to practice the Sabbath. If you have very busy weekends all the time, then it's like, when am I going to practice Sabbath? But I think that you make time for the things that are really important to you. And so you do have to manage your time. Like for me, I like to practice Sabbath on Sundays. And so I have to manage my time and know that I have to get all my homework done on Friday and Saturday if it's weekend work. So I think that there is a lot of time management, and that allows for the Sabbath to be more like freeing and fulfilling.
So you work really hard to get your homework done so that you can not do any homework on Sunday. What else do you think, like for you personally, is an essential element of practicing the Sabbath?
I think there's a lot of cool things in the Sabbath that you can practice. It's definitely not supposed to be legalistic, kind of like how I mentioned. And if you don't want to have a routine, I think that's great too. Something for me that I really love to do is maybe like continue to read a book that I've been reading, or like be creative. I really like to be creative, and I think that being around in nature is a great thing to do. Something that the Bible does say is that the Sabbath should point to Jesus, not us. And it should also be a reconnection to God and a reconnection to community. And so I think that people probably look at the Sabbath and think about like silence and solitude, like not being around people. But I think it's great to be around community and people who are like-minded, for them to like build you up and encourage you. And so I think that that's an important element that I like to implement as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I'll let Mr. Custer ask some questions.
Harper, I've thoroughly enjoyed thinking about this, and it seems like, these spiritual disciplines are ones that our age and sometimes the church forgets and kind of leaves by the wayside. And so I'm glad that you give this attention. Do you think there are other spiritual disciplines that we've neglected or don't pay much attention to in our age?
Surely. I can't think of one right now. But
prayer,
what do you think?
One.
Oh yeah, prayer, obviously.
Fasting. Those are kind of disciplines that we do.
Yeah, I think that those are definitely important, and those can like they don't have to be separate from the Sabbath. I think that they can like be practiced together. So, yeah.
Do you think you can practice one like Sabbathing well without practicing the other ones? Praying, reading God's word, fasting, other things like that.
I kind of mentioned how the Sabbath should be a reconnection to God, and so I think that you should fill your time with things that point you to Christ, and but also resist the temptation to make it I have to check all these boxes to make sure I'm rested well. And so I think that you can definitely use those practices, and they're definitely beneficial, but you have to make sure your heart's in the right place, I think. And so, yeah.
One of the things you note in your oral is that Sabbath and attentiveness go hand in hand. I think that's a really keen observation. What do you think attentiveness is? What do you mean by that?
I think attentiveness, the opposite of attentiveness, would be numbing things out. And so, because the Sabbath is supposed to be a focus on God and not ourselves, I think it's really easy to think of Sabbath resting and think of I'm just going to scroll on my phone or watch a movie because that's me resting. And I think that just numbs things out, and it numbs out maybe your emotions that you're dealing with, or maybe the things that God is walking you through in your life at that time. And so I think attentiveness looks like resisting things that numb your mind, and also just maybe it's even hard things that you don't want to encounter in the moment. Could also be attentiveness, and I think it looks like being proactive in pursuing God, but also letting Him meet you halfway, if that makes sense. Not trying to strive for pleasing God, or no, I think you should strive to please God, but instead of striving, I think it's just resisting that. And I think it follows that you would be attentive to God in what he's doing in your life.
Yeah, I think you're right. So here's a wild question. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you think God could have made us creation without having this built-in practice of Sabbathing? Did he have to make us to rest?
I think, like, in the big scheme of things, like, the practice of resting points to our finiteness and how we're not always going to be in a constant state of producing. We're not always going to be in a constant state of ceasing, if that makes sense. And so because we have, like, these rhythms of life and rhythms of resting, I think it is essential to our finiteness, the way that God made us. If he made us to be infinite, I don't think that we would have the need to, like, physically slow down and, like, take moments to rest. So, yeah, I think it is essential to our finiteness.
Yeah, I think you're right. On the other side, so maybe I'll provide some pushback. What comes about of the person who goes, well, if I do give in to any Sabbathing, if I do rest a lot, then I might not be that good of a person. I might not be that accomplished. I might not be that productive. And they look through, history of examples of people who didn't Sabbath, like Napoleon Bonaparte. He rested, I think, and slept for 4 hours a day. So you go, well, he got a lot done, not resting. And then you go through, and I was looking through some of the other men in history who didn't sleep much at all. I think it was Isaac Newton who slept 3 hours a day. Well, what do you say to the person who goes, well, so I either get to maybe draw closer to God, which is good, or get to accomplish and do a lot of good things. What do you say to someone who has that worry, who looks at that dichotomy?
I would say that in the books that I read, they both mentioned how people who are kind of addicted to this, like, hurried lifestyle do have a shorter lifespan. And I don't know exactly, like, at one point those men, like, passed away, but I definitely think that does have a lot to do with your health as a person. And then also, both of the books that I've read talked about how people who take time to rest and rest from the work that they do or their education actually do have a better work ethic and they perform better. And so I think that is, like, shown within a long period of time as well, not just, like, in the period of, like, a week. And so I think that's what I would say to the person who thinks that would be, like, a good idea. I think I would say, like, if you want to look at it in the big picture, I think this would be more beneficial to you. And I mean, really, if the Sabbath is, like, if you just practice it once a week, it's, like, 1 day out of the 7. And so I think that it's very beneficial to your work ethic, and I think it's good for your health as well. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
You're half done with the questions. Can you believe it? It's
That's
gone
exciting.
So fast. So I gave Mr. Custer a chance to ask about this guy, but he didn't, so I'm going to take it. So kind of on accident, yesterday on our way home from Dallas, we did church in the car, and we lost our signal to our normal sermon, so we listened to a John Mark Comer sermon. So I've hardly heard him write or speak, but he's a baller. Awesome. He knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. So tell me something else that you read in his book that you weren't able to talk about in your speech that was meaningful to you.
I'm going to look through my notes.
Yeah, you took a lot of notes, and I wanted to give you a chance to bring something up that you didn't get to. Well, I'll start while you dig. Tell these guys who don't know about John Mark Comer what he's up to right now.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. But I tried to interview John Mark Comer, or tried to reach out to him and see if we could have an interview, because I read his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and he was actually taking a sabbatical. So I didn't get to interview him. But I thought it was really cool that he was like even putting that into practice. But yeah, so I thought that was cool that he was putting that into practice. And I was like, wow. I think something that John Mark Comer talks about,
Let me take it a different direction. And the one quote that he brought up in the sermon that I heard yesterday, it was in reference to Dallas Willard. And so Dallas Willard was asked this question. Here's my question for you. If you could describe the life of Jesus in one word, what would it be? How would Harper answer that question? Not how would Dallas Willard answer that question?
I guess I'll kind of say it like this. I think with learning about my thesis and learning about Sabbath resting, I've learned so much about Jesus' character. And so I think I would say that one word about Jesus is that he... Oh, that's a hard question, though, because there's a lot of things that come to mind. I think that he was restful. That's kind of a... basically has to do with my thesis. But I would say that is like one word that I would use to describe him, because it just kind of describes the way that he walked through life, and he wasn't forced to say anything. He wasn't peer pressured into do anything. He was very restful, and he trusted in God's work behind the scenes, even when he was in the garden, like before his crucifixion. And so I think that that's a word that I would use for Jesus.
Yeah, I don't think that's what the first thing that comes to mind for most of us, and I think it's maybe that we try to justify our own agenda and to say, okay, Jesus was about these things because I want to be about these things, and not many of us want to be about being restful because it feels like it's wasteful. So Dallas Willard's answer was pretty similar to yours. So maybe you have a future in philosophy. His word for Jesus was relaxed, and just not pushing his own agenda, but trusting that what God had for him was better than what he had in mind. Mm-hmm. So do you think Jesus, as he was restful or relaxed, that he disappointed people?
I think so, because, or I can even think of like the people who were expectant for a Messiah. They were expecting a king. They were expecting someone to ride on a horse and come and fix all their problems right away. And I'm sure that they were disappointed when they saw Jesus. But that doesn't overshadow it doesn't overshadow anything that he did. And so I think that that's kind of how we can see someone who is restful. We can sometimes be disappointed in them and guess of like, I'm working harder than them, or I'm achieving these things faster than them. So yeah, I would say that people were definitely disappointed, but I mean, that didn't stop Jesus at all, which I think is a cool thing.
Were you disappointed when John Mark Comer, when you didn't land the interview with him?
A little bit. But I was mostly like, it was honestly cool to just like see him put into practice what like I had read about him. But I definitely was disappointed. I thought that would have been a super cool interview to have. And I even emailed him and everything. So it was kind of disappointing for me.
So as a people pleaser, as a self-described people pleaser, have you found yourself having to disappoint people as you've learned to practice Sabbath?
I definitely think so. It's really hard for me to say no to someone who's asking me to do something. I think a lot of things that people ask of you can be really great things. Like an example of a really great thing is like I had the opportunity to be an RT leader and a senior assistant, and I mentioned that in like my kind of like senior year like stressful things that I was kind of dealing with, and I think that those are really great things. And I would not want to say no to those. But I definitely think that there are things that I could have said no to. And people probably would have been disappointed in me, and honestly, maybe they wouldn't have been, and that would have been like all in my head. I think that we convince ourselves that people are more disappointed in us than they actually are. So yeah.
You talked about forced rest, where your body kind of breaks down. I was wondering, it's not quite the same, but just with your injury, with your surgery that you had in junior high, what's something that God taught you about rest during the process where your body just wasn't able to do what a normal body does?
I think it taught me a lot about dependency on others and dependency on God, and trusting that what God is working through behind the scenes, like, is going to what's the word? Trusting that what God is doing behind the scenes, like there was no way that I could secure any results for myself. Like, I could not hurry up the process of healing. It was very painful to do anything. And so I think that was a great practice for me of, like, I wasn't able to secure results myself. And so I had to really trust that, like, my body was going to heal itself, and that this happened for a plan, and the people around me are going to help me, and, like, God put them there for a reason. And so I would say, like, dependency, it taught me dependency, and it also taught me how to not secure results in the moment, and also trusting, like, that was a really long process for me. I think it taught me a lot about patience as well, and also to celebrate the little victories that come along with it too.
That's great. Thank you.
So you talked about in, I can't remember if it was your paper or your notes, the concept of over Sabbathing. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the dangers of under Sabbathing, right? So what are the dangers, do you think, or do you think we're even in danger of over Sabbathing?
I definitely think we are. I think when I think about Jesus's life and how he interacted with the Pharisees, back then, I think that they definitely over Sabbathed, and they let it be. It was a very legalistic practice, and they even held it above each other's heads. And I think that Jesus resisted that a lot, because, I mean, he even performed miracles on the Sabbath, and he told the Pharisees, like, God and I are, like, we're still going to be working on the Sabbath. Like, you don't need to be, but, like, we're still going to be working. Like, you can trust that. And so I think over Sabbathing, it can become very much like a burden, and it can become not beneficial and restful. And so I think that there's also a danger in that. I think that for us in this day and age, our tendency is to under Sabbath, but I think that there's definitely a way to over Sabbath. It's kind of like the golden mean.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I want to know, do you have someone in your life that you think is a good example of someone who works hard and does everything they need to do, but then also rests well?
I can think of a lot of people. I can think of a lot of, like, authors I know, and I think when I, like, right now coming to mind is, like, Mr. Custer, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but I think that you do a really good job of understanding the value of resting, and he knows a lot about it, which is, like, really cool to listen to him. I think Mr. Custer's definitely the expert here. When Mr. Priya said that, I was like, no. But he's also very smart, and I just think that in Mr. Custer's, I've never seen him feel, like, pressured to do anything. And I think I even remember it was either in 7th and 8th grade, we were talking about wearing watches in one of our classes, and Mr. Custer said that he doesn't wear a watch because he wants to be in the moment and he wants to be present. And I was like, I could never do that. Like, I always need to know what time it is. And I always thought it was kind of silly, but I think, like, now growing older, like, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm wearing a watch now, so, like, let's just cover that up. Mr. Custer's a really great example of that. And I'm so thankful that he can be here on my panel.
Yay! Me too. That's so great. Thank you, Harper. Excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harper. I feel like actually in this time I've not been doing a great job and have to be forced to. I feel like I'm on the physical path of God saying, okay, you're not doing a great job, slow down. And it gives me some reason to physically have to.
Right.
But thank you. So I'm curious, a lot of things you've said here about Sabbathing, I think you're right. It seems to be deeply intertwined with what God's doing with us and the whole, large scheme of things, that we need to depend on Him, like you said, that we can't do it without Him. And it almost seems like there might even be some tie to salvation, to depending on God, to really trusting Him. And it makes me wonder, can a non-Christian Sabbath well? Can they rest well? Since they don't trust in God, since they don't depend on Him, since they, at the rock bottom, all they have is themselves.
I think that a non-Christian can rest. I think that they know what resting is. But it does make me think of St. Augustine's quote is our hearts are restless until it rests in you. And God made us to be in relationship with Him. God made us to rest in Him. And so I think that they can attempt to rest and they can take days off, but I don't think it will be fulfilling in the way that we rest. And even looking at the big picture of things, when we pass away into eternal rest, I think that that's also just a picture of how we're able to find that fulfilling rest. And I don't think that they can find that from their own ability. I think that they're going to be exhausted if they try to find their own fulfilling rest.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that raises another question that I had on the other side. In heaven, will we need rest when we're in perfect glory and we have our glorified bodies?
I know about heaven or one thing that I do know about heaven, I don't know much about it, but is that God will give us jobs and He will give us positions, and I think that our works here on earth will determine that. It won't determine whether we're in heaven or not, but it will determine the jobs that we have. And so I think that I want to say that we will just be in a constant state of resting, but I'm not for sure. But I think so. But I'm not for sure.
Something about that seems right, though, right?
Yeah, it does. What do you think, Mr. Custer?
I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone's an expert on heaven, right? I don't know, but I think you're right. There's something about it, yes, we will, of course, always be resting. But then, right. It doesn't seem like that's what we want to say is going to be resting. Not maybe in that sense. And so there's this really interesting part of resting, that you're bringing out, that it has to do with being attentive to what God's doing in the world, being attentive to who He is, setting aside who we are so that we can be there in that time. And that does seem to be what heaven's like.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we'll need to Sabbath and take a day to do that. It's a weird concept to think about, right? Out of the millions and millions and millions of days we're going to have, we're not going to be, I doubt it's setting a day aside, but maybe we will still.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? What do you do? So coming back to this life, to our time now, one of the things you say is that Sabbathing, practicing it, is essentially about giving yourself grace. How come it's so hard to give yourself grace, to teach yourself to do this in this life?
I think because we're constantly told that we shouldn't do it, and or not that we shouldn't do it. We're encouraged to, I guess, not pause and not think about ourselves. And when I say that, I mean that's Satan's influence in our world. I think the last thing that he would want is for us to pause in our hurried life, and to look around and be like, hold up, what's God doing in my life? And like, how can I be attentive to that? And so I think that's why it's so hard for us to give ourselves grace, is because it's really hard to, well, let me say this. It's not giving yourself grace, it's receiving grace from God. And when I mean by like giving yourself it, is because you can't just like receive it without willfully receiving it. And so he's going to offer it to us, but we have a part in that too, to receive that. And so I think that's what's hard, is also you have to depend on God for it. And I mean, I even struggle sometimes, like that's really not very tangible at all, I think. And so that's what I would say. Yeah.
What do you do with someone who just doesn't want to accept it? Their will isn't there. They say, nope, I'm just going to press on. Sure, I see that, Sabbathing is good, but I just have all these other things and they keep getting in the way. And I don't want to slow down. Mm-hmm. I like all the things I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really much you can't do. You can't put them in a room and lock them there for a whole day and say, time to Sabbath. I mean, that's not going to be beneficial for them, because it's not their own choice making that. So I think really all you can do is obviously pray for them, that God's going to convict them to want to Sabbath in their life. But I think all you can do is like show others through your practice that like it's so important to you and it's very beneficial. But yeah, there's not really much you can do about that, except for also like bringing up the topic of like resting, because I don't think it's and like you said, like how it's a religious practice, like it's not really talked about much like nowadays. And so I think just even bringing it up would be beneficial, and like challenging them too about like what they think about it. So
okay, one final question. So I'll make this the hardest one. If you're to say for a Marvel superhero, who would be the one that exemplifies Sabbathing? You can do DC if that's what Marvel or DC.
Okay, I have to think for
think about
a minute.
The restful superhero. It's interesting that it's hard to think of one.
It really
they don't
is,
exemplify
yeah.
that, huh?
It's
so counterintuitive.
I think that I can't pinpoint one. I'm going to keep thinking about it though. But I think that there are some superheroes who do it very well, or who don't do it well, to where they feel very forced to do certain missions, or maybe like I'm thinking of like Spider-Man in the sense is like he's just a kid, and he like it takes him a few movies to kind of figure out like his place in the world, and like figure out like his limits on things, and like so I think that would kind of be like the opposite, but I can't really think of one specifically. I mean, honestly, kind of like Tony Stark. The example I can use for that is like in Endgame, like he was kind of like Spider-Man's like mentor in a sense, and so I think he was a good voice to help him like find his place and understand that like he doesn't have to like hurry through all the moments. I think he was able to help him like come to terms with some of like the loss in his life, and then even like at the end of Tony Stark's life, which is like so sad. I think it's also just kind of a picture of like ultimate rest. Like he knew his time where he needed to go, and he didn't want to strive for any longer. And so yeah, that's my answer. It's not the best one, but yeah.
No, I like that. Yeah, and he does get that redemption there at the end of his life. It's highlighted. Well done, Harper. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion here. It's time for us as a panel to hand it over to you for you to ask us a question. All
right. So this is for everybody. I have the same question for everyone. we kind of talked a little bit about how the Sabbath is kind of customizable to the person and the season of life that they find themselves in. And so I know that y'all all three are in different seasons of your life, and including me as well. But I wanted to ask, what is one Sabbath practice or something that you like to implement on the Sabbath, or a restful activity that you find a lot of enjoyment in? Because I think it also depends on being an extrovert, being an introvert, where you find your energy from. And so I enjoy asking this question to people, because not that I'm going to take it to heart and be oh, I need to start doing that now. But just, I feel like it tells a lot about the person. So that's why I wanted to ask y'all.
I'll start. I think recently I found a lot of rest in something small like watering plants in my yard. It just causes me to not do much, not have to worry. It's something I guess it is a little bit of an action, but I can sit and think and pray and meditate. I don't have to be hurried about things, and I even think about the grass and my trees and my plants watering, that they aren't in a hurry for going anywhere, and so I contemplate a lot of life. And I think the other thing that allows me to have the Sabbath and rest and to slow down is reading. I like to sit out my back porch in the sun and read.
Awesome.
I think for me, anytime I can be outside. So I really like to go for little runs, and so anytime I can go and just run around my neighborhood or run around Midland College and just look at the trees and the flowers in the sky, I enjoy doing that. I often go running with my mom, and she rides her bike, and so I like to hang out with her and chat and do that, so that's enjoyable for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Mrs. Snell stole mine, so I'm not sure that I can say the same thing. Rude. Yeah. So yeah, certainly, both of these two shared something similar, but being outside, being, I guess, a part of a world that you realize that you don't have much control over. Mm-hmm. And I think this is part of why Jesus used a lot of those kinds of images when, he was walking and talking with people of, okay, the kingdom of heaven is like that tree that you see over there, or it's like those flowers, or consider the birds. And I think, I'm grateful for the modern world, and I'm grateful for air conditioning, and that I have a bed to sleep in, mm-hmm. and that I have an iPhone and all of those things. They're not bad in and of themselves, but it's also, if I think that that's what my world is built around, is these four walls that are around me, then I can tend to worship progress instead of, I can tend to worship the gift instead of the giver. Mm-hmm. And so I think I think this is related. I hadn't connected them in my mind. The thing I was going to say is watching my children, and because as a parent, you realize there are just a lot of things that you want and hope for your kids that you don't have control over, and that it's you realize that even though I want certain things for my own kids, or for y'all as my math babies or whatever, that even if they're not happening right now, God does play the long game with my mm-hmm. kids, because He's playing the long game with me. And sometimes it's easier to see that in other people than it is then you can go, oh wait, maybe God deals with me in the same way that I should be dealing with my own kids. And mm-hmm. and this is, one of the beautiful things about how God works is any time that you can start to pay attention, it's all around you. So he can put it in watering plants, He can put it in kids, He can put it mm-hmm. in a song. He's just always waiting to kind of break through. So if we have ears to hear. So.
Yeah.
Well, Harper, gosh, there's just so much richness in what you shared. There's a lot of things that you've given us to think about, that God's given us to think about, and you've very much embodied being present. And I mean, Mr. Custer's question about Marvel superheroes, that was, you handled even that with a lot of poise. The true answer was the postulator, which is Mr. Custer's superhero identity.
Of
and
course,
so,
I forgot.
Yeah, you forgot that one. And so, so the one who thinks deep thoughts. So, but I just wanted to say that it's been a gift to watch you grow and mature into this, and thank you for the words that you've shared, and we're really, really proud of you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Custer is going to close us in prayer, and you're done.
Heavenly Father, we're gracious that you come beside us each and every day. Teach us as a good father does, to learn after you. And so help us to take to heart the words that Harper shared with us, and the wisdom that she's presented. Let us see it as being true. Let us know it in our being, and let us believe it, so that we can trust you, that we can depend on you and not on ourselves. And I just thank you for Harper's example, her faithfulness to you, her diligence, and wanting to understand your world and be attentive to it, to learn from you and all that you put before her, in the hard times, but also in the good times. And so we just thank you for her time here at MCA, and the impact that she's had on students and even on us as tutors, to teach us to rest well. We know that you will do many great things in her life, and so we ask that your Spirit would be upon her and go before her as you lead her into a new season. And so we ask these things in your wonderful and powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.